South African and US poultry producers failed to reach an agreement on how much chicken should get into South Africa free of anti-dumping duties. We look at what South Africa risks by holding to its guns. Hello and welcome to Global Business as we bring you the latest developments on the business front. I am Penina Kariba live in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Also coming up tonight, Africa's largest investment and entrepreneurship fair closes in Morocco. And a pearl designer in Cotonou who's shaking up the local style industry with her pearl creations. Now, a spat between South Africa and the US over American chicken imports is threatening to destabilize trade relations between the two countries. The two parties have not been able to agree on the amount of duty-free chicken imports that should be allowed into South Africa from the US. South Africa is part of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which affords African countries free trade with the US. The latest spat may threaten that agreement and completely sever trade ties between the two countries, as Sumitra Naidu reports.
The US and South Africa are embroiled in a battle over the import of chicken leg pieces to Africa's second biggest economy. Americans are not big consumers of chicken legs. The US wants to sell them at the cheapest possible prices without having to pay added duties. South Africa doesn't want the chicken, but may be forced to take it in order to remain a part of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which gives select African countries free access to the US market.
If US producers want to sell in South Africa right now, they have to pay particularly high tariffs because the South African government says that they are dumping their chicken, which means they're selling it at an unfair price. The core of the issue is how you divide up a chicken. When you produce a chicken, you produce, of course, a whole chicken. And at the point in which you divide it into different pieces, you can spread the costs into different pieces. So does half the cost go into the chicken breast or into the chicken leg, for example? And understanding this different costing is basically what's really causing a lot of the conflict.
The South African Chicken Producers Association says the local industry cannot compete with cheaper imports. The sector employs around 108,000 people and is the biggest contributor to GDP in the agricultural sector. If the market is flooded with cheaper chicken products, it could destroy this industry.
It would mean that some jobs would possibly be lost. Some of the industry's market would potentially shrink unless they were able to make some changes that would increase their productivity and drive down costs.
South Africa has a tough decision to make. It will have to choose between saving its chicken industry and South Africa's trade relationship with the US or give up AGOA. Trade under the Act rakes in over $2 billion.
The more we impose tariffs on American exports to South Africa, the less likely it is that AGOA will be extended next time round. In fact, I will be very surprised if it gets extended. Now, that will cost South Africa a huge amount of money. Billions of rands are earned by exports to America.
South Africa's Trade and Industry Minister Rob Davies has a tough job on his hands when he visits the US next week to negotiate trade terms. Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
All right, so let's go live now to Johannesburg. Angela Kupler joins us from there. Angela, this tussle has dragged on for a while now, and there's only 5 months left before the AGOA expires. Why has it been difficult for South Africa to reach a compromise with the US?
Well, Penina, as Sumitra just told you now, it's essentially going to decimate the poultry sector if this cheap subsidized import of chicken is allowed to come in. At the moment, the latest data shows us that imports, specifically the chicken legs, make up around 20% of consumption. So local farmers simply can't compete because their subsidized competitors are producing that poultry at a much lower landed cost. The South African farmers that we've chatted to have suggested that the country needs food security, and that includes the poultry sector. And this argument also goes to the point that why should the country use local currency to purchase cheaper chicken in US dollars? Because it's going to affect the trade deficit. And that doesn't make sense, the farmers say. Penina?
But Angelo, the Americans are now saying that the window of opportunity for these discussions is fading fast and that South Africa has a great deal to lose if its stay in AGOA is not extended. So what's at stake for the country should this happen?
Well, there are several sectors that are involved when it comes to AGOA. We understand that there are around 300 product lines and close to 6,000 products that are imported into America from Africa under AGOA, which is free of any duty or tariff. The biggest for the South African sector is the auto and auto parts sector, and that generates around, as Sumitra said, around $2 billion worth of income that affects the current account and its deficit. There are 36,000 people that are directly employed in the auto and parts sector that are depending on these exports, and around 270,000 more that are in indirectly related jobs. And the industry, in terms of the poultry sector, on the other hand, employs around 56,000 people indirect or directly, and 108,000 indirectly. So it also shows the poultry sector is also the biggest consumer of maize, which is another sector, agricultural sector, that is under a huge amount of pressure at the moment. Penina?
Angelo, we know the two sides have been meeting in the US for negotiations. What are some of the proposals South Africa is putting forward?
Essentially, they're not putting any proposals forward. They simply don't want US or Brazilian chicken or chicken legs dumped here. They want protection so that they can compete. Bear in mind that South Africa can't export into the US and the EU because of sanitary issues. There are certain very strict regulations in place that doesn't allow South African chicken or chicken legs to be imported into those countries. And as I said just now, it's exported, and it's at a lot less than South Africa's can produce those particular chickens. So simply because South African farmers aren't subsidized and can't compete, that's why they want this kind of protection. But these subsidies that the farmers were getting were cancelled many years ago, and the issue really is, the heart of the issue here is that South Africans consume a huge amount of poultry, including eggs. And based on the fact that many South Africans live on or below the bread line, any money that they have that they can spend and buy more chicken or any other basic foodstuffs, they're going to go for the cheaper stock, which means that they'll buy cheaper poultry. And this is something that can't be provided by local farmers. So there are some, as Sumitra said, really tough decisions to make. It can't subsidize farmers because it can't afford it, but it wants to keep the auto sector and that big number of employees happy and creating income for the country. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, Penina.
They are indeed stuck between a rock and a hard place, Angelo. Thanks very much for joining us. Well, I do understand that we can now cross over live to Washington. Kate Fisher now, I'm told we have Kate Fisher, that's right. Yeah, let's go to Washington now. Kate Fisher is joining us live from there. So Kate, we've just had an interesting discussion with Angelo Coppola. The argument, though, for South Africa has been that an increase in US imports means a reduction in local production. A fairly valid argument, really, Kate, for an outside observer. Is this something the US has considered?
Yes, undoubtedly, and I think that's one of the problems and why these negotiations have been so intractable. But also, the US is arguing that there's a lot to gain for South Africa if they drop these duties. I'm speaking to Senator Coons, one of the lead senators on this lobby, and he says that his poultry farmers in his state are desperate to form partnerships and invest in South African poultry companies to try to create almost a hub for the whole of Africa. So he says there's a lot of investment opportunity. Also, he says that the arguments that the South Africans are using are outdated and even illegal. He cites a 2013 World Trade Organization ruling that ruled in favor of the US in a similar dispute with China. So he's saying also that actually now that South Africa has a much more advanced economy, perhaps it doesn't even qualify for the benefits of AGOA. He simply says, along with these other senators who are really lobbying this, that it's not fair that South Africa gets these benefits, but there's nothing reciprocal for US poultry farmers.
But Kate, while AGOA has suddenly increased employment across Africa and brought the continent closer to international trade, there has been criticism in recent years that it has disproportionately favored the US and its hunger for raw materials. How is the US handling this criticism?
Well, frankly, it really refutes that criticism. It says that AGOA was created in order to help Africa, the continent, and all those individual countries. And it is helping them that South Africa has this preferential ability to trade, to import into the US and not have to pay any duty whatsoever. In fact, many people in the US are saying maybe it's time that we change that altogether, and that there should be only two-way trade partnerships created, particularly with those countries like South Africa, which have got a more advanced economy now. Because, like the EU, for example, has several of these individual two-way trade agreements, and there are some businesses in the US that are concerned that now Europe is going to have an edge over those American businesses that don't have that import duty advantage. But I think what everybody sort of agrees is that something needs to change, and this agreement does need to be adapted. It was created 15 years ago and things have changed now. It only really benefits the car industry and the clothing industry. It's time for a modification and an adaptation so that it benefits South Africa and is more meaningful for US companies as well.
All right, Kate Fisher live for us in Washington. Many thanks, Kate, for joining us. Now, the third edition of Hub Africa Investment Fair in Morocco, dubbed the largest fair and investment and entrepreneurship in Africa, has closed. The event saw entrepreneurs and investors from across the continent converge to boost business connections and strategies.
Believe in Africa, Invest is Africa was the focus for young entrepreneurs and investors in this year's Hub Africa Investment Fair held over the weekend in Casablanca, Morocco. Hundreds of investors from countries across Africa converged for the two-day event.
The Hub Africa this year is really on a good way. We're starting last year, we were like around 16 conferences, 15 workshops. Now there is more and more people who want to come. For an example, 89% of people that were last year, they want to come again for this edition. And now we're starting to have a great audience around Africa.
It is dubbed the largest fair of investment and entrepreneurship in Africa. It aims to boost business ties between countries in Africa. Targeting over 10,000 young business entrepreneurs, this year's event aimed at establishing global business networks for young entrepreneurs. One entrepreneur said Africa has the potential to grow economically once it gains more experience in the business world.
Investing in Africa is I think it's more easy than other areas, simply because I think that in Africa, firms haven't got the experience that other areas, other continents, European or Asia continent got. So in Africa, it's more easy to invest.
Some countries are already reaping the benefits of the past two Hub Africa editions.
Mauritius has 70 investments in 14 different countries and in very diversified sectors. Starting with the agricultural sector, we produce sugar from Tanzania, we produce sugar from Ivory Coast, hotel trade in Morocco, we have chicken production in Mozambique, financial sectors in Zimbabwe. Therefore, it is diversifying. There is a willingness for Mauritian companies supported by the Mauritian government to invest in different African countries.
Hub Africa started in 2012 and was aimed at bringing together young entrepreneurs from Africa. It has since acted as a platform for African entrepreneurship. Mahia Mutua, CCTV.
The Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development plans to lend Egypt $1.5 billion over the next 5 years, extending $300 million each year. The fund's Director General Abdul Wahab Al-Bader, however, did not give details of the loan. The fund is the Kuwaiti government's agency for aiding developing countries in areas such as agriculture, transport and energy. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have provided billions of dollars of aid to Egypt in the past 2 years to support its economy and help it maintain political stability. Let's turn our attention to the stock markets now. And Nigeria's main stocks index ended a 10-day winning run after falling 2.1% in early trade on Tuesday, as rally triggered by peaceful presidential elections in Africa's biggest economy waned. The index had climbed to more than 12% on Wednesday and Thursday last week after opposition leader Muhammadu Buhari defeated incumbent Goodluck Jonathan, marking the first time where a sitting president was removed from power through the ballot box in Nigeria. Coming up, another feather on President Al-Sisi's cap as Egypt gets an upgrade. And a highly prized kind of pepper, but workers have little to show for it.
Sustainable development and a commitment to developing partnerships with Africa. Some of the key phrases already used at the Africa Global Business Forum here in Dubai.
There is a need for a predictable environment in which investors have to put their money.
You're watching Global Business. Welcome back. Now, Moody's Investors Service has upgraded Egypt's issuer and senior unsecured bond ratings to B3 from CAA1 with a stable outlook. The ratings agency cites improving economic performance and ongoing commitment to financial and economic reform. While the new rating is good news for the country and a boost of confidence for President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, it still leaves the country 7 notches below investment grade. Moody's expects real GDP growth in Egypt to recover to 4.5% year-on-year for the current fiscal year 2015, which ends in June, and then to rise to around 5% to 6% over the coming 4 years. This expected level is based on an assumption that domestic political stability will continue, as well as improvements in the business environment, which in Moody's view will be conducive to higher investment levels. Yasser Hakim now joins us from the Egyptian capital, Cairo, for more on this. Yasser, was the upgrade expected and how has it been received, considering that the country is still 7 notches from investment status?
Just before the latest economic summit in Sharm el-Sheikh last month, there were positive news coming up from financial institutions. So it was kind of not as a big surprise, but it came as good news, especially that it's maybe the first time since 2012 where Moody's has been decrediting Egypt and going down 5 notches in the last 2 years alone. So this is a positive news for the government. Well, the government has issued a statement saying that the news coming from Moody's it proves that the economic reforms by the government, the austerity measures, are going according to plan and are reaping their benefits, that there is confidence in the policies of the Egyptian government and in the Egyptian market as a whole, and potential of the Egyptian economy, as well as that it's a sort of a good also for the short-term basis, that it shows that stability, Egypt could be stable for the next few months, for a few years for investments, and that the government feels that this will bring more confidence to investors to come and invest in Egypt in the next year or so.
So yeah, so with this latest development, do we now know when the country is likely to float its $1.5 billion bond?
Well, the government said that it's planning to go ahead with the bond. It will not change any plans for that. And initially, it was supposed to get loans from the IMF. But right now, it has turned down any idea or suggestions for these loans and said that the bonds will be much better. First of all, you get the money as a bulk, not like the IMF loan would be given over 3 to 4 years. Maybe the interest rate is a bit higher than the IMF loan, but at the same time, you repay the bonds on a longer term basis, so it's easier for the government to repay. And at the same time, when you get the bonds or when you float the bonds, the money you get, there are no conditions with it. The IMF puts strict conditions that sometimes the government and even the public does not accept. It feels it's a bit too harsh for the social side of the country and its burden on the citizens. So the government is going ahead with the bonds.
Yeah, yes, sir. It's only yesterday that you and I were talking about President Sisi's charm and the positive news since he took over. So what should we expect next?
Yeah, we've got a lot of developments every day, and you were talking about that yesterday, and now we get Moody's to bring a boost to what we were saying to prove we were correct. And what the government is saying and what Sisi is planning to do is just go ahead and continue on the plans and the austerity measures that he already had undertaken, such as reducing expenditure by reducing subsidies on energy, by trying to attract more investments, trying to attract more tourism to increase income. And then you have a boost 10 days from now. Egypt will receive the $12.5 billion promised by the Gulf Arab states during the Sharm el-Sheikh summit. The foreign reserves now stands at $15.5 billion. And with this new amount of money, this will further stable the currency, further strengthen the financial situation in the government. And what it needs now is to concentrate on putting forth and executing all the promised plans and projects that were signed during the economic summit, and all the legislation and laws that have been ratified to be put into effect so that the cycle starts to move and the country would improve. And at the same time work on security, try to improve security even more as time goes on to protect the investments that will be coming to Egypt soon.
All right, Yasser Hakim, live for us in Cairo. Many thanks for joining us, Yasser. Now, Punjab peppers are one of the few sub-Saharan African products protected by geographical indication, denoting it as a regional specialty. However, despite prices soaring for this aromatic pepper, workers in the plantation say their wages have remained static.
Punjab pepper is a source of pride for many Cameroonians. Famed for its quality of its aroma, it's one of the first sub-Saharan Africa's geographical indication protected crops. This means it's protected in 16 countries that belong to the African Intellectual Property Organization. Punjab pepper growers are allowed to label and market their peppers with a mark from the region. Thanks to this label, the price of Punjab pepper went up from $6 per kilogram to $20. But despite the rise, workers are yet to benefit.
The full hours of the day is 8 hours working. So if you could work the 8 hours, then you have your normal pay. But in that full 8 hours, there is always a kilo, a fixed kilo that you must harvest before you. Let me say, for example, if the fixed kilo is 30 kilos or 25, if you work the 8 hours and you could not have the 30 kilos, you may not have your full work of the day.
I am paid $2.70 per day.
Emmanuel Zenuo is a consultant at Africa Intellectual Property Organization who were key in attracting the GI status of the paper.
4 years ago, we started the GI process. The prices went from simple to triple.
The geographical area of Punjab paper is the districts of Penja, Mbanga, Njombe Penja, Lom, Tombel and Manjo. Several factors contribute to the peculiarity of the paper. For example, the volcanic ground and its black basalt rock, which is not found elsewhere. Experts say Punjab papers have been cultivated here for more than 50 years. The Punjab paper is sold locally and also exported, with producers particularly interested with the lucrative European markets.
At the level of the European Union, there is France, which is a big consumer. There is also Switzerland, Belgium and Germany. These countries are enough involved into geographical indication process. They know what is a GI. It is also necessary to note that the European Union is the first consumer of the paper to the world. They moreover consumed around 500,000 tons in 2010, which represents appreciably nearly half of the world's production. It is the biggest market we have, and there is paper already sold between 70 and 100,000 a kilo, while it is between 8 and 10,000 only here.
Currently, there is no official packing for Penja papers. The labeling is left to the individual producers. However, some in the industry believe this might be leaving the paper susceptible to fraud on the international market.
This paper is a victim of fraud. It is the occasion to say it. Many operators or storekeepers come to buy here the paper of Penja, which is more appreciated, looked for by the consumers, whether it is at the local or international level. They mix it with other papers they buy at the Dubai, which is a big world shopping mall. That does not allow the consumer to consume the wanted product. And this objective can be reached only when we will have our packaging center. Machines are practically ready. We will import them soon.
There are 3 products that have achieved the GI status in sub-Saharan Africa: Cameroon's Penja paper, white honey of Oku, and coffee of Ziamaman Center from Guinea. Noel Makugu, CCTV.
Let's look at commodity prices now. Brent crude oil fell below $58 a barrel on Tuesday on signs of growing oversupply as Iranian officials visited Beijing to seek more oil sales following the framework nuclear deal that could lead to the lifting of sanctions. Oil markets were also pressured by a Goldman Sachs report saying prices needed to remain low for months to slow U.S. oil output growth. Now, global oil markets already face a supply glut, with producers pumping over 1.5 million barrels per day, more than demand in the first half of this year, according to analysts. Now, Priska Azonin, a 22-year-old pearl designer, is raking in profits from sales and fashion shows through her talent for creating pearl ornaments. The entrepreneur has attracted customers internationally despite having no formal education or training in design.
A pearl designer in Benin is shaking up the Cotonou fashion industry with her creations, and this despite having no formal education or training in design. 22-year-old Priska Azonin has successfully integrated modern design and African culture in her pieces. Azonin is now raking in profits from sales and fashion shows internationally through her unique talent in weaving pearls.
Ladies from Porto Novo, Wando Market are amongst my customers, and I also receive orders from key ceremonies like funerals and baptism ceremonies. I also make necklaces as well. When an entire choir wants a single type of necklace, I make.
The young entrepreneur said that her success in the fashion industry is down to her passion for the work.
Many people think that this is time-consuming and it discourages them, but when you are passionate, this is fun.
She focuses on handbags, necklaces, rings and earrings and has received numerous awards from fashion shows. She is also beginning to attract people from different countries.
A bag made by her is not something for everyday use. It is unique, it is pretty, it is very beautiful. It is out of this world. When I carry one, I feel like I am the best.
In traditional African society, the pearl was used to define status in the community, with each pearl ornament having its own meaning and belonging to different deities. Some pearl ornaments were dedicated to voodoo and only voodoo priests could wear them. Leslie Murungu, CCTV.
And finally, a look at the currencies. And Kenya's shilling strengthened on Tuesday after the central bank sold dollars to banks. Traders had said the shilling may weaken following the Garissa attack that was likely to affect tourism, which is a key foreign exchange earner for East Africa's biggest economy. Traders forecast the shilling, which has lost to 2.3% so far this year, would trade in a tight range of 92.50 to 93 shillings per dollar in the next few days, as the fallout from the attack is balanced out by more likely interventions by the central bank. And that's it on Global Business tonight. I am Penina Karibe. Thanks for watching.